Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the DSCI FINSEC Conclave 2022. This is the fourth edition of our flagship event. Welcome to the session on reaching to the last mile offline and contactless payment, role of crypto, mobile, hardware, and cloud technologies, wherein we will be discussing about the overall ecosystem of offline and contactless payments, trends, technologies enabling contactless payment, cross-border payment system, some sort of market adoption, and security perspective on the contactless payment. For this session, we have a very eclectic line of speakers deliberating on this emerging theme of offline and contactless payment. Please join your hands to welcome Dr. D. Jankiram, Director, IDRBT. Welcome, sir. Yeah. Next speaker, we have Mr. Pariwat, Kanithasen, Deputy Director, Payment System Policy Department, Bank of Thailand.
Hello.
Welcome, Mr. Pariwat.
Glad to
Next, we
be
have
here.
Ms. Monica Jasuja, Head of Money Management, GoTo Financial. Welcome, Ms. Monica. Next, we have Mr. Sachin Kulkarni, Senior Vice President, Global Services, Fiserv.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Welcome, Mr. Sachin. And in the last, we have Ms. Shinjan Noopur, Director, Channel Partners and Alliance, Mastercard.
Hi, everyone.
The session would be moderated by Professor Dr. D. Jankiram, and all the attendee, I would request you to kindly share your question over the Q&A and a chat window. Ms. Monica, may I request you to unmute? I think as of now it is muted. Yeah, yeah. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Ishan. Welcome to this interesting panel on last miles offline and contactless payments. A very interesting panel members here. Before I shoot my questions to the panel, I would like to make a few introductory remarks. Certainly, I think the last mile is one of the key challenges that we are facing for many years, not just now, but for many years. In fact, one of the things that I've noticed in recent times is that the hilly regions, especially the inhospitable regions, and then connecting them, especially the pensioners who live there, and then trying to have payments reaching them, looks like a very very deep problem that was flagged to us at IDRBT by regulator and also others connected with the payments ecosystem. In fact, IDRBT has started looking at this problem very deeply in recent times and then tried experimenting with two technologies. One is the low power wide area network called LoRa, and in fact we have built a system for last mile transactions using the LoRa, and in fact we had set up an experimental test bed over 5 kilometers so that the end devices can easily talk to the core banking system and can extend the last mile payment system in a completely different way. This was tested by IDRBT, and then we are trying to work with banking system to extend the last mile, especially in places where it's very, very difficult to reach. For example, the hilly regions where the low power wide area network can work much better, because most of the time the payment ecosystem requires only small messages to be transmitted between the devices, not streaming kind of data, high data that will be needed there. The other one which IDRBT is working is on the 5G local area network, rural local area network, and we are actually working with NABARD and others to set up a 5G private network with the vans that NABARD actually has with the banks, and trying to create a different kind of an ecosystem and short circuit and get the best of the technologies to the rural population to start with. In fact, we have an experimental test bed now, 5G private network, that can be used for financial inclusion purpose, for educational purpose. and soon we will be extending that as a last mile branch. For example, the van can go and then you can get the AR VR models to actually create a virtual bank experience for the rural population. And both these technologies we are trying to incubate as last mile labs at IDRBT. So a very interesting lab that we are trying to create, akin to what we will be discussing in this panel today. So from that sense, I'm very excited to be part of this panel and learn from my co-panelists on this important subject on last mile contactless payments. I'll go with one first round of questions to all my panelists, one after the other. I would like to start with Mr. Sachin Kulkarni, and then would like to ask him how basically the security issues are playing a very, very important big role, cyber security issues with respect to both offline and contactless payments. One is the technology challenge, the other is the cyber security challenge. Both are very, very important because you just don't want to have a solution, but you also want to have the best security in place when these things are happening. And I see that Sachin has very deep experience on this, and I would like to ask him his views on how both these are going to be matched when we go to the last mile with respect to offline and contactless payments. Mr. Sachin.
Thank you, Professor Janakiram. And once again, it's a pleasure to be on this DSCI FinSec Conclave 2022. Like you, I'm also looking to learn from my fellow panelists here, but I'll offer some perspective. I think at a broad level, I see sort of 3 or 4 trends in this space as it relates to security. Right, the first one is obviously multi-factor authentication, and security with MFA, including password, device in use, and biometric identification, as you know, is gaining a lot of momentum. As security increases, then the platforms will become more flexible, ease the burden on IT and admin teams. And when I talk about biometric, I'm talking about any combination of fingerprints, facial recognition, iris recognition, heartbeat analysis. They're all surfacing as reliable ways for security, ultimately aiding customers' trust, and that will translate into loyalty for brands. But what I would like to sort of say is that my understanding, again as part of a global fintech, is that the government of India is increasing resilience and security for contactless payments through a pretty comprehensive and progressive approach, working with the whole ecosystem, which is the theme of this conclave, right? Issuer banks, merchants, token service providers, large global fintechs such as us, and we all have a key role to play. If you look at transaction fraud when PIN or OTP were compromised, biometric authentication involving fingerprinting, face scanning, or retina scanning with two-factor authentication integrated with smartphones is the way in which the tech is evolving. And of course, this tech involves embedded programming, where a mobile phone generates public-private key, encryption, application-level intelligence to check the mobile device whether it's intact, and checks for geolocation, etc. So that's one piece of it. The second piece, I think, is as it relates to digital wallets. Digital wallets are expected to account for more than $10 trillion of transaction volume by 2025. This is according to our research as of last year. And I think the Juniper research of this year says 4.4 billion consumers globally will shop with a digital wallet by next year, which is 52% of the overall e-commerce payments across the world. And so I just want to talk for a second about this. I see a couple of things here. Obviously, we're talking about NFC here, which allows devices nearby to communicate, to verify customer and buyer information. But a trend we now see is instant issuing of digital cards rather than plastic. Another trend we see is with digital wallets is that the adoption of private label cards or PLCC was lagging. And I'm sure, Noopur, you would probably identify with this, given your background. And, one of the things we as fintechs, have a role to play is form alliances so that PLCCs are accepted by network providers. For enhanced security on chip-based cards, users can now disable contactless transactions, or they can adjust transaction limits, or even issuer banks can limit cumulative number of consecutive transactions, contactless transactions, to limit fraud. And the last thing I want to say on this dimension is that in the US, cardholder liability is really zero, right? Because, and that's a huge reason for card adoption in the US market. In India, cardholder liability is really based on the issuer bank cardholder agreement in terms of the terms and conditions. But RBI is coming up with ways to restrict that liability. And to your point about rural India, Professor, for users that don't have a smartphone, they can push a key sequence on a feature phone and see the last 5 transactions anytime, ensuring a level of safety and a peace of mind. And the third thing I will talk about is, again, in terms of security, is the idea of tokenization. Tokenization is increasingly becoming a cost-effective and secure way to safeguard customer data with card and misuse and fraud. And I think the new RBI norms which came out last December, where merchants can no longer store data of a card on file or COF. I think they were given a 6-month extension, and then the law goes into practice on June 30th. What this does is, if a card CVV is compromised, then the end consumer is still protected. So the merchants now have to work with issuer banks as token service providers for tokenization, from provisioning to registration to card mapping to creating authenticating tokens to protect the plastic card as you use, let's say, Apple Pay or Google Pay. So the whole ecosystem has to be ready. But when it's ready, I think it's going to become much more secure with some of these progressive norms. So that's my perspective.
Thank you, Sachin. I think you've really brought out the important points of tokenization and also the importance of security in the contactless payments. I think let me move on to Mr. Pariwat, and then because he seems to have worked very much on the prompt pay fast payment system from Bangkok, which seems to have also been pioneering stuff in the cross-border payments. I would like to know his experience on how he's extending the prompt pay for the cross-border transactions, which is becoming very, very important now, given that we are in a different globalized world. I think suddenly cross-border payments are going to become very, very important. I would like to listen from him his experience on how he is able to extend the prompt pay system to the cross-border transactions.
Well,
Over to you, Pariwat.
Thank you, Professor, for the question. Well, you mentioned earlier that how you're trying to address the last mile problem in India. In Thailand, we are a smaller country, so geographically we don't have the same issues. But in the sense of financial inclusion, I think we share similar challenges of getting to the people who are unbanked, who don't have credit cards or debit cards, or small merchants who don't have EDC machines. And these people are the ones we had in mind when we established PromptPay back in 2017, when we had this fast payment system set up, and we try to address these little people and ensure that they are able to conduct payments with each other. So use cases would be sending money to others, or paying by using the mobile phone, and getting money or from the government, things like that. And it has been a sound success. If you look at the numbers, the digital payment transactions per person per year, before PromptPay was around 49, and now it has reached around 312. So it has jumped quite a lot. And if you look at other countries for benchmark, like Sweden, the postal card for digitalized countries, like 528. So we are on the way to becoming more and more digitalized, and we are happy about this. And since prompt pay has been a big success, even a game changer in Thailand, um, we thought that we should team up with other countries in the region who have a similar fast payment systems and connect these payments together because for cross-border payments, we too realize that there are so many pain points. If you are a migrant worker, you won't go to a bank and send money back to your family because it costs much more. Like in Thailand, it's like 13% of the total amount that's remitted. It takes about two plus working days. You never know when or sometimes you never know when the money is going to arrive. And what else? You have to provide so much information to the bank or the provider that you're overwhelmed. So what we have tried to do is to simplify the process and make it user friendly like PromptPay. The first country that linked up to the remittance is Singapore. So this is the PromptPay Pay Now linkage where when if I were to send money to someone in Singapore, I would just use the mobile phone number of the recipient, and the money would be there or within seconds. So this is the same experience I have when I send money to someone in Thailand, and the Singaporean guys as well. So this is has been launched like last year, and we have seen increasing number of users from PayPay now, and we have another linkage with other countries for QR payments. So not only remittance, but if I were a tourist and go to another country, I could use my mobile phone as well without paying cash, without using cards. And the merchants would be happy too because they would not need to pay any fees. Similar to an experience domestically. So what we've been doing is to branch out to other countries in the region. India is in the pipeline. We are now discussing with RBI and FISEC on forging a linkage between Thailand and India because we before the COVID pandemic, we've had like 2 million Indian tourists coming to Thailand, and about each year, and about 100,000 Thai tourists, especially pilgrims, are going to India. So these are the people who benefit from our new linkage. So this is the broad overview of what we've been doing, and I'm very proud to say that it's been very well received by the public and by the international community as well.
Oh, very nice, Pariwat. I think, going forward, I think there's a lot of cooperation that is possible across the Asian countries and also between Asian and African countries on the payment systems, especially if you look at UPI, which became one of the most popular platforms in India. There's a possibility of cooperating across multiple nations in actually adopting what India has done in the payment systems. I know. Certainly, thanks for bringing your views from Thailand, Bangkok especially. And now I would like to move to Noopur on her views, especially on the NFC-based contactless payments and then how it is getting adopted. Before I hand over to Noopur, I would also like to share what my daughter was recently saying about the Apple Pay. When she moved in the US, she was saying the experience was so contactless and seamless that she was telling me that she never realized that the phone can do everything, and now she doesn't need even her watch when she moves around, and even payment just does by just flipping her watch or whatever it is. I think we seems to be getting into a new world, especially with the NFCs helping us into this contactless payments. And I certainly would like to listen to the views of Noopur on this. Over to you, Noopur.
Thank you, Professor Janakiram. A personal experience always helps, right?
Yes.
I think contactless payments are the future. They are faster, they are safe, cleaner, and they are more efficient. And the increase in contactless payments is a very global phenomenon. In fact, we did a study in April 2020 when COVID, was all around, and 8 out of 10 consumers globally said that they were using contactless payments, and more than 50% of people actually had switched over from their most used card to a card which offered them an NFC enabled payment option. So I think India actually has a better advantage over what others are doing globally, because we have leapfrogged to smartphones. The experience that your daughter was talking about in India, that is available more frequently in terms of the users. So there's a study by Deloitte, and it says that India will have 1 billion smartphone users by 2026, and a lot of them would be rural areas, where this sale would happen, and they would be internet enabled phones, and we would it would be a good guess to assume that a large part of them would be NFC. So add to that 5G and device tokenization, and then probably we are looking at a huge base of potential contactless users. The challenge, because this is a panel discussing reaching to the last miles. The challenge with contactless payments acceptance in tier 3 cities and beyond has been because of the absence, or a low infrastructure of POS devices which are NFC enabled. But with PCI CPOC standards, which were released in the end of 2019, various tech service providers have actually come up with solutions that allow merchants to download an app on their NFC phone and start collecting payments by just tapping on the phone. This is popularly known as tap on phone. So I think this methodology, this new technology will actually solve for the problem of acceptance, which in those cities was primarily low cost acceptance devices were not available. And servicing of terminals in those areas, like the hilly areas that you mentioned, or the hinterland of the country, which is huge, was a challenge. So with these two technologies and these two solutions coming together, phones on the issuing side and on the acceptance side, I think we are very much ready to reach the last mile also. Government interventions have also helped. COVID has changed the way we were living, right? So before COVID came in, contactless adoption was at 2%. And uh, 2 months back, it was over 50%. And a lot of that accelerated because of COVID. Contactless became the buzzword. Probably it was the second most used word after COVID, because everything was contactless. People promoted contactless. Everyone wanted to do transaction contactless. And that really accelerated the way we operate. And I don't think we are going back, because we have experienced a good thing, and that will remain. So I think we are at a very good point, and it will only grow. Security measures coming in will make people feel more confident about using these transactions. And government regulations would really help. There's a lot of push from digitalization. And with tokenization, I think this is only going to grow, and adoption will only get accelerated. So that's my view on where the current market situation is.
Thank you, Noopur. I think in this panel, though we termed it as last mile, I think we are really going from last mile to long mile. I think from cross-border payments, we are looking at NFCs, and we are looking at, of course, IDRBT's work on, how the low power wide area network can be used to reach the rural population. So in that sense, I think there seems to be quite a broad spectrum relating to payments that is being discussed in this panel. Now, let me go to our last panelist, Monica. In asking the technology question, what do you see is the big technology stuff that we can now see in terms of a big bang inventions in the payment space? I would like you to, being the last, probably you can throw some light on what to expect in this space in the next 10 years. Over to
The
you.
most difficult question for me, because I have to be clairvoyant at the same time, know that central bank cannot allow us to do many things. But let me take a stab at that. Dr. Janki Raman, before I actually answer the question, I just want to take a step back and probably because we're talking about last mile, remind everyone that the easiest and the fastest way to make mobile payments, even without a big bang technology such as NFC, has always been using your small smart feature phone, which is why mobile money took off in Africa, and which is why we also see wallets still occupy a very, very big part of our lives, especially in Africa, of course, Latin America, and some parts of Southeast Asia. Not to forget the people who actually need the payments and need the money when they do, and they do not have access to many of the physical branches or even people who are able to offer them money at cash points. So, keeping that in mind, I really don't think that technology is the game changer for last mile delivery of payments. I actually feel it's going to be the change in consumer behavior. Reason being that a person exposed to mobile or contactless payment one time with a great experience is going to have a network effect on the entire ecosystem, including the small community or the larger community they belong to. And a person with a really bad experience is going to ensure that there will be others who will probably not join the system. So, from my perspective, the two or three things that I believe is going to change how we are looking at payments, especially for last mile or even for others, is to be looking at low cost technology. NFC has been expensive, it's become cheaper and cheaper as the decades have gone along. But with small smart feature phones being available at a very low cost point, question is going to be how can we make it more pervasive, which is going to be enabled by safety and security solutions in the cloud, which has already started happening. But then again, there are regulatory hurdles to make it available to everybody so that the power rests in the hands of the consumer to make the choice, for example, whether they want to use it or they don't want to use it. But I believe that we should be able to democratize it in a way because of low cost, which has happened because of telco. Now, the question is, what can we do on that adoption on the payment aspect? Second, for me, is going to be about being able to, and Sachin has mentioned this earlier about device fingerprinting. We've talked about the cloud. I think AI is also equally important. When you understand user behavior, you understand what they typically do. AI is not just about crunching data and for me to figure out which is the best way to run a merchant promotion. It would be best if I knew that if I know a user behaves a certain way, how can I ensure the safety and security for that user at the highest standard so that they always feel secure making a payment instead of feeling that their money is going to get stolen. And last but not the least, on the same ground, I believe that instead of looking at things from a very bi-directional point of view, which is almost like a two by two matrix, what you are and what you have, we should probably start looking at multi-device factor authentication, which is transparent in the background, but users understand the importance for it and therefore become financially literate to be able to enable them to make the right financial decision associated with what they would like to use to make a payment. I don't think we need to mollycoddle users into behaving a certain way. I really feel that consumers are enabled with the choice, especially given the fact that data privacy is coming in. We are going to have laws where consumers have rights. So I think as an industry, we need to follow the same path and enable consumers instead of enabling just businesses to offer payments, enable consumers that choice.
Yeah, thanks, Monica. I think, yes, you brought the important points of, no, the feature phones, RBI governor, recently released the, system for using feature phones for UPI payments. That's one of the major developments that have happened in this space in recent times. One of the other things in our theme was the offline payments. Which no probably the panel has not touched yet. What I see is that there's a great space with respect to feature phones. If they can be designed for offline payments, we could be into a different world altogether. But I don't know the kind of issues that are still needed to be solved, because suddenly the security and authentication and authorization issues working in an offline mode are so much different from working on an online mode. But an offline mode payments are certainly something that can revolutionize the rural payment space, because that's something where no connectivity, they can still do the payments in an offline mode. That can open up a whole new dimension to the payment system ecosystem. I would like to hear your views suddenly on from the panel before we close on the offline payment space and what we should be doing in that space. I'll go to Sachin first and then see what are his views on this offline payment ecosystem and where we are and how should we go about developing this. Over to you, Sachin.
Yeah, Professor, I don't think I am qualified to talk about this particular topic. What I will say is that I do see Aadhaar QI code based offline eKYC coming up, which I think really complements the other forms of authentication. And I mean, one point from an ecosystem perspective is, lending, for example, is based on ultimately lenders' confidence in terms of a score that they assign to the person. And that confidence is ultimately linked to how real that identity is. And in India, we now have Aadhaar authenticated by OTP, we have authenticated by fingerprint, authenticated by phone number, and now QR code based offline KYC or eKYC. And these variety of KYCs make it easy for people to access microloans to the point, Monica, you were making in terms of giving them that choice rather than mollycoddling them, right? And so, but I think, the way I look at, if I take your question a little bit broadly, rather than just on offline payments, from an ecosystem perspective, what I really admire is what the government, I think, is doing in terms of the interoperability standards in developing with industries such as India for education, for example, or NDHM for healthcare, or IDEA for agri-tech, or account aggregation for finance industry, where standard data schemas are exposed, and it becomes very easy for any third-party applications to be integrated, consent-based consumption, um, and discover providers of any service real time, again removing latency and friction and democratizing all of these processes in the hands of the consumer. And the last point I'll make and hand it back to you is yet another example is dynamic discovery of APIs, which again opens up ecosystems and creates a level playing field, I think, across multiple industries. For example, Brecken Protocol. If you go to breckenprotocol.io, across multiple domains, ONDC for e-commerce or Ocean for credit lending. So these are things that are going to make the access much wider, rural as well as urban for the end consumer. It's going to make things secure and it's going to make a level playing field. And sorry, the one last point I will also make is on e-rupee, which is again a prepaid voucher system or direct benefit transfer that's transparent, that's frictionless, and one that completely avoids latency in terms of fund distribution. So I think these are some of the things that I think government of India is doing, which together make the system a lot more democratized, a lot more open, and a lot more frictionless.
Excellent. I think that suddenly some ideas on going forward, how to make our payment system more inclusive, bringing in all those sections of the population that we should be taking along in this digital journey. I think one of the key things that we should worry about in India is that as we embarked on this digital India journey, we should make sure that it is inclusive and all the people are included in it, especially the vulnerable segments as well as the senior citizens as well, because it's very important to create an inclusive environment as we move with this digital India initiative, especially in the payments space as well. I would like to ask Pariwat and Monica together this question on. See, one of the key things that's coming up now is this alternate data, the data that is accessible from many forms, which is not a formal data, but then it's available, which can be used for both securing and also getting better payment systems in place, because both of you are talking about AI and then cloud in some sense. So I would like to understand what is the models that we can create going forward, which makes things a lot more better in the payment system. For example, perimeter based security systems, where we know that a guy generally doesn't move beyond these perimeters? Can we use those kind of data in securing our payment systems as we put them in place? And this is something that I want you to understand from both of you from a technology perspective. First, I'll go to Pariwat and then next to Monica. No, Pariwat, you should unmute, I think. Yeah.
Well, this is a question which is a bit out of my bounds because my focus is less on the IT part of payments, but I do get your point, and I do see that there's um, quite a lot of innovations going on to make use of these data. I'd be more pleased to hear what Monica is saying on this.
Sure. Yeah, I think maybe then we can go to Monica and then see if she has any views on this. Monica?
Sure. So, Dr. Janakiraman, this is an important question. I think I'm going to talk from the perspective of cards, and then obviously we'll go into other types of payments. But looking at what a payment provider actually knows about not only the user but also payments, location-based, for example, ring fencing of how and what to do as a payment provider can be useful. But I think the bigger thing is that as far as the data is concerned, we use the data only when required to be able to do chargebacks, for example, in a card-based transaction, or to be able to settle. We don't actually use this card data or any other form of consumer data along with other parameters that we gather during a payment transaction to actually use it for protecting users and actually preventing fraud. And this is where a lot of the risk management technologies that are currently in operation, and most of the schemes do work with such providers unless they have their own, is actually trying to make sure that this is happening quite in the background. And both financial institutions such as banks, payment providers in between, as well as basically the authorization and the authentication leg of the transaction, is able to get this data to make a better choice, to be able to allow users to go through with the transaction or not. So it's not like the transaction data does not offer the ability. It is about being able to use the data in a way. Now let's take the case of 3D Secure. We've always known about the second factor of authentication, but if banks are now going to use the new EMV code protocol, then they will have more information which they can then use to guide their decision on whether to actually allow the authorization of the payment to go through. This is just one example. There are other parameters associated with multi-factor authentication that can also help, not just for transaction processing, but also to know who the user is. And I think Sachin mentioned about the Aadhaar based system. But I think that is where it becomes even more critical for us to understand how these two can come together. So you have a way which identifies who you are, but then you have a set of parameters that happen within the background as almost invisible processing to make sure that who you say you are is validated to say that this is you. And that I feel is can be managed by both biometric information of the user as well as other data points that are currently captured in all devices, including smartphones. And I think that is where the next layer of innovation is happening, where you are able to almost layer them two together to make sure that transactions happen. And this will also be the case for A2A payments, which we are not talking about right now. But UPI has that with device fingerprinting. So you, for example, if you go offline or if your device changes, you have to authenticate yourself all over again. This becomes a little bit more impractical in the case of feature phones, but then that's where offline payments comes in.
Noopur, one final question to you. As we are getting into this payments journey, one of the critical thing is a customer experience. For example, if there is a failed transaction or double spending, all these will become matters of concern. Especially if you look at now 5.55 billion plus transactions on the UPI, and then if what is the kind of reliability and then security that we are going to guarantee for the end customer, that's going to be very critical going forward, especially with our payment systems. From that perspective, I would like to hear your views. Especially in the NFC system, you will always be worried if I go into the supermarket no, will the no transaction automatically gets fired even without my knowledge, because my card is near the payment system, and then will the transaction will go through. These kind of issues will come more and more as we move forward. So from that perspective, I would like to hear from you. What is the level of security guarantees that need to be offered going forward? With these contactless payment systems.
So,
Over to you.
yes, Professor. So, see, contactless, especially with NFC, is is a new system of payment. I mean, given the fact that we have been using cards for so many years in a particular manner. So, someone who's associated with payments industry, when I first used my, I did my contactless transaction, as muscle memory would do it, I handed over my card to the person across the counter, and he tapped the card, and I was probably talking to someone. So I, moved my hand forward for pin, and he said it's done. And I don't know whether I was scared more or excited more because this was my first experience. And but then I realized what happened. I was talking about it, but had never really seen it. I was not in Mastercard yet. And then, but I made sure that every time then, thereafter, I probably tapped my card because I realized how good it is. Had I had a bad experience, probably I would have not done it. So, like Monica said, it is very experience based, right? I'll give you another incident. I think all of us who are in payments, we keep looking at cards and POS machines, and probably that's what we do every time we go out. So there's a bookstore near our office, and I go there all the time. And there was a conversation happening with the store manager and between and a lady who was trying to buy a book, where the um, uh, the merchant asked, uh, "Can you not tap?" And she said, "No, I don't because it's not safe." My husband actually was standing in a shop and someone came with a POS machine and did a 10,000 transactions. So I knew that, none of that could have happened because 10,000 is not allowed. You can't really go around with a POS machine in a store. But that was the perception that she had. Probably she would have picked up a story, and that made her never tap her card. So it's very personal, and I think a lot of that can improve just by awareness on a customer side and on the merchant side on why contactless makes sense, why it's not as unsafe as it sounds. That because we are used to using pins, specifically in I'm talking about India, and if you are made to pay without a pin, you're worried, right? Money is so close to everyone's heart. But if you keep talking about how safe it is, probably more than a dip transaction, because the cryptogram here is stronger, and you're not giving your card out, you're actually holding a card, and it also stops COVID from spreading. And it is faster for a merchant also. You don't need to hand out change. It's very good for queue busting. So if just by creating awareness, I think we could probably be at another 10%. And we do a lot of that with issuers and acquirers and merchants to make sure that people know why it is good. And it is just a small transaction, and it is only one transaction which is possible every time. And issuers actually have the ability to put a velocity check and allow only so many transactions, right? So it has all the features plus more. So it is actually a good tool. It makes everyone's life easy. But that can only happen if you have had a good experience, for which the infrastructure needs to be in place, so that when you do it for the first time, you get the right experience. And probably you will keep repeating it after that, and tell a good story like you did at the beginning of the conversation about the good experience that your daughter had. So I think it is primarily about that. Security concerns are not really real. A lot of that is just a misunderstanding or misconception. So by taking care of that, we, I think, are at a very good place to move forward in this journey.
Excellent. That's reassuring, to know that the most of these are secure and safe. I think a lot of it you summarized is customer experience. I think the UPI based payment system has suddenly has good experience. That's why we see exponential growth in the that payment space. And going forward, I think if you're able to create a similar experience for the customers, 1 billion transactions per day may not be far off, as Dilip from NPCI says, So, but the only thing is we need to scale up our infrastructure because, you don't want failed transactions to make, people experience, a different kind of a problem when they get into that space. So I think we have a challenge in terms of scaling our infrastructure and keeping up the expectations and experience of the customer very good as we build these payment systems, But suddenly we seems to be leading that space in India right now, and hope we continue to do that and play a leadership role in terms of bringing the best of the technologies into the payment space as we go forward. With that, I think we have completely ran out of time now, as I understand. And I thank all the panelists, for the excellent views they have given, and look forward to meeting you again in some other forum and learning more about how this journey is progressing for all of us. Thank you very much. Yeah, back to you, Isha. Yeah.
Thank you so
So,
much.
well, first of all, many
Thank you.
thanks a lot, Dr. Janakiram, for coming and chairing and moderating the session. And thanks a lot, each and every panelist. Thanks a lot, Mrs. Monica. Thanks a lot, Mr. Sachin. Thanks a lot, Mr. Shinjan. And thanks a lot, Mr. Pariwat, for joining from the Bangkok, Thailand. Thanks a lot, everyone. Looking forward to collaborate with you for the future events as well.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thanks.
Bye.